Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Believe it or not, when I was in elementary school, I hated tefillah, prayer. At that point, I attended a Jewish day school, so I had to participate in tefillah every single morning. In order to entertain myself, I resorted to inventing games and activities in my head. The longest lasting and most memorable game I played with myself emerged from my long-standing interest in Greek mythology. Between 3rd and 5th grade, my interest in mythology was primarily channeled through the fictional Percy Jackson book series written by Rick Riordan. For those of you unfamiliar with the series, it tells the story of Percy Jackson, a teenage boy from New York in the 21st century who discovers that he is a demigod, the son of Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, and a mortal woman. Throughout the series, Percy attends a summer camp for other half-bloods like him and goes on a series of quests for the gods. Percy's relationships and adventures teach the reader about Greek mythology, from the gods' personalities and roles to the different creatures and monsters believed to have roamed the ancient world. The Greek gods, with their clear-cut realms and personalities, were so much easier for me to understand than Hashem, the formless, abstract Jewish god I was supposed to be praying to. So I tried to relate to God through the stories about Greek gods. In the Percy Jackson series, each Greek god's half-mortal child had personality traits that could be ascribed to their godly parents' unique power. The children of Athena, for example, were brilliant, while the children of Aphrodite were beautiful. Sitting in 5th grade tefillah, I considered the gods' characteristics to determine which god's half-blood child I would be in the world of Greek mythology based on my personality. I did the same for my friends, my classmates, and even my teachers. I also remember looking at the translation of each prayer we recited, wondering which Greek god such a prayer would have been addressed to in the Greeks' heyday. For example, I imagined addressing Yotzer Or, the prayer which honors God's continuous creation of light, to Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. At this point, I had been in Jewish education from birth. I had tefillah and Hebrew class and Judaics class every day. Why then was I so incapable of davening, of praying to God, that I was basically resorting to heresy or paganism every single day just to stay interested in religious practice? Looking back many years later, at a time where I now happily daven every day, I've started to understand why I was so attracted to Greek mythology, and especially Greek mythology according to Rick Riordan. Our God, perhaps by design, is impossible to fathom, to imagine. Without our God having human traits to appeal to, I couldn't figure out how to relate to God. The Greek gods, by contrast, were envisioned in a way that I would describe as human plus. They had all of the same characteristics, both strengths and flaws as humans, just multiplied exponentially. In order for the ancient Greeks to get to know their gods, all they had to do was look in the mirror. And yes, I know that we believe all humans are B'Tselem Elohim, made in the image of God. But God's image and how it manifests in us is unknowable. So how do you form a relationship with a God you cannot fathom or witness? This week's Parshat Eikev seems to teach us that we build a relationship with God through a quid pro quo centered around mitzvot. If we perform the commandments that God has given us, then in return, God will treat us well. V'haya Eikev, the first two words of our parsha, form an if clause. If you obey these rules and observe them carefully, your God will maintain faithfully for you the oath he swore with your father. If and only if the Israelites follow God's commandments will God maintain a relationship with them. If the Israelites follow the laws of the Torah, Moses teaches, then God will bless them. God will make the Israelites fertile, bless their crops and livestock, keep them safe from sickness, and even lead them to military victory against other nations. This paradigm continues with a part of this parsha that we actually read every day, the second paragraph in the Shema after Ve'ahavta. Ve'haya im shamoa tishme'u el mitzvotai, we read. If you follow the commandments that I have given you, God says, I will make rain fall on your crops and provide grass for your cattle. But, God warns, if you do not adhere to the commandments, there will be no rain, your crops will fail, and you will perish. In recognition of how much theological attitudes change, the Reform movement omits this paragraph of the Shema from their Siddurim, their prayer books. But we, in the conservative movement, do not. So how, then, do we understand the relationship between God and Israel? The relationship between God and Israel in Eikev seems to be directly transactional. The Israelites do X, so God does Y. Picture a world in which you come to Shacharit on a Wednesday morning because you know that if you do, your presentation that day at work will go well. Or one in which a farmer keeps Shabbat to make sure that his chickens produce enough eggs to feed the whole family. I unequivocally do not believe that this is how mitzvot work. I don't keep Shabbat or eat kosher meat because I think it will award me any special treatment from God. I don't believe that farmers who have bad harvests or people unable to support themselves lack wealth because they have strayed from God's commandments. And, most of all, I certainly do not believe that there is ever a God-given reason for anyone to suffer or die. My refusal to believe that God prioritizes those who adhere to mitzvot means that I am tasked with gleaning some other meaning from our text. How do we find meaning in Eikev when we take issue with its foundational theological underpinning? Rather than view Eikev as providing us with direct instructions on how the world works, we can choose to view it as a metaphor. One which teaches us that having a relationship with God relies on our deeds rather than our words. One translation for Eikev is on the heels of, implying consequentiality. Our connection with the divine is not automatic. It is not inherent in our status as Jews. It is the consequence of a cycle of action which we are tasked with catalyzing. And the way to catalyze that relationship? Mitzvot. Now, the Torah speaks in physical language and absolutes. Its vocabulary for explaining the relationship between humans and God is entirely tangible. The only way it is able to explain a positive relationship between God and humanity is through physical reality. In this case, showing God's satisfaction through the prosperity that God awards the Israelites. But just because the Torah speaks this language does not mean that we have to limit ourselves to it. Eikev can serve to highlight the deep importance of mitzvot for our relationship with God without us needing to believe that mitzvot will change our material fortunes. A teaching from 20th century Jewish thinker Yeshayahu Leibovitz expands on the importance of viewing Eikev as figurative rather than literal, explaining that, quote, any attempt to ground mitzvot in human needs deprives them of their religious meaning. Grounding mitzvot in human needs means identifying how mitzvot serve us. It could mean, for example, viewing Shabbat as nothing more than a day for us to relax, or It could mean performing mitzvot so that we can get something from God in return. Leibovitz doesn't just make the case that the literal interpretation of Eikev is theologically shallow, but actually goes so far as to suggest that such an interpretation robs mitzvot of their real purpose. It is up to us, then, to find a way to operate outside of the quid pro quo paradigm, while simultaneously understanding such a paradigm to be the Torah's way of explaining to us the importance of mitzvot. We undertake mitzvot so that we can find God in the world, so that we can build relationships with the divine. We walk this fine line of delighting in the fruit of our labor, not just because we need it to survive, but also because this is how we get to know God, so many thousands of years removed from the miracles of the Bible. We might not get to inspect God's nature or break down God to understandable traits or powers like in Greek mythology, but we do get to participate in God's world, and that is the nature of our relationship, the nature of participation. Now, this wasn't always the case. We receive the instructions of Eikev, of consequentiality, just as Moses begins to recount the tale of the generation of the desert. Moses himself brings to light how that generation interacted with God in ways that no following generation ever will. This generation, but not their children or their children's children, witnessed numerous signs and deeds at God's hand. The 10 plagues, the exodus from Egypt, the splitting of the Red Sea. The generation of the desert is not in danger of losing its close connection to God, who freed them from slavery and fed them from the sky every day for 40 years. God, it seems, was the active party in forming a relationship with the original Israelites. For their children, though, it's a different story. The Exodus generation's children were born in the wilderness, after the 10 plagues, after the splitting of the sea. That generation must recount the story of the Exodus without having experienced it themselves, and so too for every generation to follow. Somehow they, and we, must not become complacent in the bounty that a settled life provides. With every passing generation, clinging to the divine, clinging to mitzvot becomes both harder and more important if we want to maintain our relationship with God. When I was young, teachers and rabbis assumed I was uninterested in forming a relationship with God because I was uninterested in tefillah. People tend to see prayer as the way of talking to God. But direct communication is hard when you never get a direct response. Now that is where indirect communication, the language of mitzvot, comes in. Prayer is just one mitzvah among many that helps us connect to God, no more or less valuable than any other of the 613. Viewing mitzvot for communication and relationship building with God requires us to transform our mindset from understanding them as a long list of shoulds and shouldn'ts to treating them as a way to bring God into our lives, available to us whenever we may want or need it. We all have times when God feels missing from our lives, times of illness, times of grief, times of heartbreak. And it is not just that we feel God is lacking from our lives when we are sick, when we are grieving, and when our hearts are broken, but often that those are the times we also feel angry at God. Suffering is never fair, and it is hard to pray to a God, to praise a God who would put us in that situation. It is a painful irony that the times when we most need a divine presence are also the hardest times to reach out for one. But what if we viewed mitzvot as our way to reach out for God without needing to find the vocabulary to express our anger or our desperation? What if we trusted God to understand our feelings simply by virtue of us feeling them, and to enter our lives when we call out through action without speech? This might look like lighting Shabbat candles in an effort to bring just one moment of peace into a hectic and overwhelming week. It might look like giving tzedakah to someone in need, or reaching out to a fellow Jew who you know is also going through a hard time. Or it could even just be Googling, what does Judaism say about insert situation here, and learning a little something new. The thing about mitzvot isn't just that they bring God into our lives, but also that they are far easier than we might expect, with almost no barrier to entry. Yes, some mitzvot may be a major commitment or a lifelong pursuit, but don't let that fool you. Just as many mitzvot can be done in 5 minutes or less. So the next time you're feeling lost or alone, the next time you are at a loss for how to reach out to God, consider reaching out in deed rather than in words. You might be surprised at just how fulfilling and also how easy it can be. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for being part of the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider becoming a regular part of our online community by scanning the QR code or visiting supportpas.org or making a donation. Shalom, and see you in shul.